What would you do if your 17-year-old son spent 3 days cooking a gourmet feast for 20 people, only to be told 3 hours before dinner that he wasn't invited because it was adults only? Well, what happened next will absolutely blow your mind. My son Alex turned his heartbreak into something so incredible that it ended up on the evening news and changed dozens of lives forever. This is that story. I'm Lena, and I'm 38 years old. My heart broke watching my son's face that day. You know that look when someone you love realizes they don't matter as much as they thought they did. Yeah, that's the look that still haunts me at night. This whole mess started 3 weeks ago when my son Alex found out his grandmother Margaret was turning 75. Now let me tell you about Alex. He's 17, quiet kid, the type who remembers everyone's birthday and actually means it when he asks how your day was. He's nothing like the rest of our family, thank God. So when Alex heard about Grandma's milestone birthday, something just lit up in his eyes. He came to me with this plan, this beautiful, naive plan to cook her a surprise dinner. Not just any dinner, mind you. We're talking about a 3-day restaurant-quality feast that would make Gordon Ramsay proud. I should have seen the red flags then. I should have protected him. But honestly, part of me hoped this would be different. Maybe this time, maybe my mother-in-law would see what an incredible grandson she had. Boy, was I wrong. Alex spent his entire weekend researching recipes. I'm talking spreadsheets, people. This kid made actual spreadsheets with cooking timelines, ingredient costs, and portion calculations for 20 people. He wanted to invite the whole extended family, make it this big, beautiful reunion dinner. He budgeted his part-time job money down to the cent. $47 for the roasts, $23 for vegetables, $15 for dessert ingredients. He even factored in gas money to drive to 3 different grocery stores to get the best deals. I watched him practice knife cuts on YouTube videos until midnight. I found him in the kitchen at 6 a.m. doing test runs on his hollandaise sauce. This wasn't just cooking to Alex. This was his love letter to a grandmother who barely acknowledged his existence. And Margaret, she had no clue. None whatsoever. See, in our family, there's this unspoken hierarchy. Margaret sits at the top with her country club friends and her charity galas. Then, there's my husband's siblings, all successful in their own obvious ways. The lawyers, the doctors, the real estate moguls. And then there's us, the school teacher and her weird, quiet son who likes to cook. But Alex didn't see it that way. He just saw his grandma, the woman who used to let him help plant flowers in her garden when he was little, before she got too busy for grandchildren who weren't pre-med or pre-law. Day 1 of cooking prep, Alex was up at dawn marinating the beef bourguignon. I kid you not, this 17-year-old was making beef bourguignon from scratch. He'd found some fancy French recipe online and was determined to nail it. Day 2, he's making fresh pasta. Hand-rolled, hand-cut pasta because store-bought wasn't good enough for Grandma Margaret's 75th. Day 3, the day before the dinner, Alex is in full chef mode. He's got timers going off every 15 minutes. He's got 3 different soups simmering, and he's practicing his presentation on every plate, like he's competing on Top Chef. The house smelled incredible. Even our neighbors were asking what was cooking. Alex was so proud, so excited. He kept checking his phone waiting for RSVPs from aunts and uncles and cousins. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Margaret. Not to Alex, mind you. To me, because God forbid she communicate directly with her grandson. The message was short and sweet. Change of plans. We're celebrating at the Elite Park Hotel downtown. Adults only. Sorry for the late notice. Adults only? I stared at that text for a full minute, reading it over and over, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that didn't crush my son's heart. Alex was in the kitchen, putting finishing touches on his apple tart tatin, humming some song under his breath. He was happy. Genuinely, purely happy in a way I hadn't seen him in months. And I had to walk in there and destroy it all. Alex, honey, I called out, my voice already shaking. Can you come here for a second? He bounced into the living room still wearing his makeshift apron flower in his hair, grinning like Christmas morning. "What's up, Mom?" Did Aunt Sarah finally text back? "I really hope she can make it because I made extra portions of the soup she likes." I held up my phone and I watched his face change as he read those four devastating words. Adults only. The light in his eyes just went out, like someone had flipped a switch. His shoulders dropped, his smile faded, and for a moment he looked like that little boy who used to ask why Grandma couldn't stay for dinner when she visited. "I don't understand," he whispered. "Did I do something wrong?" And that's when my heart completely shattered. Because no, Alex hadn't done anything wrong. He'd done everything right. He'd poured his heart, his time, his money, and his dreams into showing his grandmother how much he loved her. And she'd excluded him without a second thought. To understand why this hurts so much, you need to know about Margaret. My mother-in-law isn't evil, not in the obvious way. She's just selective about who deserves her time and attention. Margaret lives in this beautiful colonial house on Maple Street, the kind with perfectly manicured hedges and a circular driveway. She's been the president of the Willowbrook Country Club for 12 years running. Every Tuesday, she hosts book club for the neighborhood wives. Every Thursday, it's bridge night. Weekends are for charity galas and fundraiser dinners, where she gets her picture taken with local politicians. She's not cruel, she's just busy. Always too busy for anything that doesn't fit into her carefully curated social calendar. I learned this the hard way when I married her son David 15 years ago. See, I wasn't exactly what Margaret had in mind for daughter-in-law material. I'm a third-grade teacher at the public elementary school. I drive a 7-year-old Honda Civic. I shop at Target, not Nordstrom. But Margaret taught me the rules of her world pretty quickly. Love in the Henderson family is conditional. It's based on achievements, on status, on how well you reflect back the image she wants to project. You want to know when I first saw this clearly? It was at David's birthday dinner 6 years ago. Margaret had prepared this elaborate meal, invited the whole family. But when my nephew Jake, David's brother's kid, started talking about his art classes, Margaret literally changed the subject mid-sentence. "That's nice, honey," she said, not even looking up from her salad. "Sarah, how's Michael's law practice doing?" Jake was 10 years old. 10. And he just shrunk into his chair like he'd said something wrong. That's when I realized that in Margaret's world, there are the golden children, and there are the invisible ones. And unfortunately for Alex, he fell into the second category. But it wasn't always like this. When Alex was little, maybe 5 or 6, he actually had a relationship with his grandmother. Real moments. Beautiful moments that I can still picture perfectly. Margaret used to have this amazing garden behind her house. Roses, tulips, these gorgeous hydrangeas that bloomed every spring in colors I didn't even know existed. And Alex, this tiny little boy with dirt under his fingernails, would follow her around with his own little watering can. She'd tell him stories while they planted. Stories about her own grandmother, about the old farmhouse where she grew up, about how her mother taught her that flowers needed patience and love to grow properly. "You have to talk to them, Alex," she'd say, kneeling down in the soil beside him. "Plants can feel when you care about them." Alex believed every word. He'd whisper to the seedlings, tell them about his day at kindergarten, promise them he'd come back tomorrow to check on them. Those were the moments when Margaret was just grandma, not the country club president, not the social butterfly, just a grandmother teaching her grandson about patience and growth and love. I remember one afternoon in particular. Alex couldn't have been more than 6. He'd fallen off his bike and scraped his knee pretty badly. David and I weren't home, but Margaret was babysitting. Instead of just putting a Band-Aid on it and calling it done, she sat with him on her back porch for 2 hours. She told him about the time she was 7 and fell out of her favorite climbing tree, how her grandmother made her special chamomile tea and told her that scars were just proof that you were brave enough to try new things. Alex hung on every word. When we picked him up that evening, he was so excited to tell us about Grandma's scar stories and how she let him pick flowers for me from her garden. But then things started to change. As Alex got older, as the family grew, and new grandchildren were born, Margaret's attention shifted. Suddenly, there were Cousin Emma's piano recitals to attend, Cousin Michael's football games to cheer for, Cousin Sophie's honor roll ceremonies to celebrate. Alex kept trying, though. God, how he tried. When he was 9, he made Margaret a ceramic bowl in his art class, spent weeks on it, painted it blue because he remembered blue was her favorite color. When he gave it to her at Christmas, she smiled and said, "How lovely, dear," and set it on the counter. I found it in her garage sale pile 6 months later. When he was 12, he wrote her a story for her birthday. A beautiful story about a grandmother and grandson who went on adventures together. She thanked him politely and asked his cousin David Jr. about his science fair project instead. Each time I watched Alex's light dim a little more, but he never stopped trying. He never stopped hoping that maybe this time this gesture, this effort would be the one that reminded her of those garden days. That's what made this dinner plan so heartbreaking, because I could see what he was doing. This wasn't just about cooking a meal. This was Alex's last-ditch effort to bridge the gap that had been growing wider between them for years. He thought if he could just show her how much he'd grown, how talented he was, how much effort he was willing to put in, maybe she'd see him again. Really see him. The night before he started cooking, he came into my room around 11 p.m. I was grading papers, and he just stood in the doorway for a minute, fidgeting with his sleeves. "Mom," he said finally, "do you think Grandma remembers teaching me about the flowers?" My heart just clenched, because I could hear everything he wasn't saying. Do you think she remembers when I mattered? Do you think she remembers when she loved me? I think she remembers, sweetheart. I told him, hoping I wasn't lying. "I want to make her remember," he said quietly. "I want to show her that I listened, that I learned about taking care of things, about putting love into what you create." That's when I understood. This dinner wasn't just a birthday gift. It was Alex's way of saying, "Look, Grandma, I became the person you taught me to be. I just grew up in a different garden than you expected." He'd spent years watching Margaret celebrate his cousin's achievements, while his own interests were dismissed or ignored. Art classes were frivolous. Cooking was a hobby, not a skill. Reading poetry was impractical. But Alex had found his way to show love through food, through creativity, through the very patience and care she'd taught him in her garden all those years ago. He was using the lessons she'd given him, just applying them in ways she didn't recognize anymore. The cruel irony is that Alex had become exactly what Margaret tried to teach him to be. Patient, caring, thoughtful, someone who put love into everything he created. She just couldn't see it because it didn't look like the success she valued anymore. So when he announced this dinner plan, I knew it was his Hail Mary, his one last attempt to show her that the little boy who whispered to seedlings had grown into someone worthy of her pride and attention. And I let him try because maybe, just maybe, food would speak a language that Margaret could finally understand again. Once Alex committed to this dinner, there was no stopping him. I'm talking about a level of dedication that would make professional chefs jealous. This kid transformed our modest kitchen into a full-scale culinary operation. Day 1 started at 5:30 in the morning. I woke up to the sound of cabinet doors opening and closing, pots clanging, and Alex muttering to himself as he laid out every piece of cooking equipment we owned. And when I say every piece, I mean he even pulled out the fondue pot my sister gave us 3 Christmases ago that we'd never used. "Morning, Mom," he said when I stumbled into the kitchen in my pajamas. "I'm starting the beef bourguignon marinade. Did you know you're supposed to marinate it for 24 hours for maximum flavor penetration?" Flavor penetration. My 17-year-old son was talking about flavor penetration at dawn like he was hosting his own cooking show. The counter was covered with ingredients I didn't even know we had. Where did he get pearl onions? When did we buy bacon that thick? And is that actual cognac sitting next to our coffee maker? Alex, honey, where did all this come from? He handed me a receipt that was longer than my grocery list for a month. I went shopping yesterday after school, hit 3 different stores to get the best prices and quality. The butcher at Morrison's even gave me advice on how to select the best cut of beef. This kid had networked with local butchers for his grandmother's birthday dinner. I watched him work that first day, and it was like seeing a completely different person. Alex has always been quiet, thoughtful, but in the kitchen, he was confident, purposeful. He moved around like he'd been doing this for years, instead of learning everything from YouTube videos and library cookbooks. He had this massive timeline written out on poster board and taped to the refrigerator. Color-coded people. Blue for prep work, green for cooking times, red for critical temperature checks. It looked like something you'd see in a professional restaurant kitchen. Okay, so the beef needs to marinate until tomorrow evening, he explained, pointing to his chart. Then I'll start the actual cooking process. The bourguignon needs to braise for 3 hours, but I can use that time to prep the vegetables and start on the dessert components. Dessert components. He was making dessert with components. But here's what really got me. As I watched him carefully trim the beef season, it with this blend of herbs he'd researched and mixed himself, I realized something. Alex wasn't just cooking. He was creating an experience. Every single decision was intentional, thought out, designed to show love. He'd chosen beef bourguignon because Margaret had mentioned once 3 years ago that she'd had an amazing version at some French restaurant in Boston. He remembered that tiny comment and built an entire meal around it. Day 2 was when things got really intense. Alex was up before his alarm, which was already set for 6 a.m. I found him in the kitchen making fresh pasta dough from scratch. You know we can buy good pasta at the store, right? I asked, watching him knead this perfect golden dough. Store-bought pasta is fine, he said, not looking up from his work. But handmade pasta tastes like someone cared enough to spend the extra time. That's what I want Grandma to taste, that someone cared. And right there, my heart just broke a little bit more. Because this wasn't about impressing anyone. This was about love made tangible. The pasta making process took Alex 4 hours. 4 hours of rolling, cutting, hanging delicate strands to dry. Our dining room looked like an Italian grandmother's kitchen, with pasta draped over every chair back and improvised drying rack. But that's when something beautiful happened. David's brother, Uncle Mike, stopped by unannounced. Mike's different from the rest of the family. He's a veteran, spent 2 tours overseas, and came back with a different perspective on what really matters in life. He walked into our pasta-draped dining room, took one look at Alex, carefully cutting fettuccine, and just smiled. Well, I'll be damned, Mike said. Kid, this looks like serious business. Alex lit up. Finally, an adult who wasn't questioning his choices or suggesting shortcuts. Uncle Mike, I'm making fresh pasta for Grandma's birthday dinner. Want to see my timeline? For the next 2 hours, Mike sat at our kitchen table while Alex explained every dish, every technique, every reason behind his choices. And Mike listened, really listened. He asked questions about cooking methods, shared stories about meals he'd had in different countries, even offered to help with some of the more challenging techniques. You know, Alex, Mike said, rolling up his sleeves, in the army we had this saying, you can tell how much someone cares about you by the effort they put into feeding you. Not just the money spent, but the actual effort. The time, the thought, the love. That's when Mike taught Alex the secret to perfect knife cuts. Military precision, he called it. Showed him how to hold the knife properly, how to keep his fingers safe, how to make every slice uniform and clean. It's not just about the food looking good, Mike explained. It's about showing respect for the ingredients, for the people you're feeding, for yourself as the cook. Watching them work together was magical. Mike wasn't trying to take over or show off. He was just quietly supporting Alex, giving him confidence, treating his efforts with the seriousness they deserved. Your grandmother's going to be blown away, Mike told Alex as they finished cutting vegetables. This is restaurant quality stuff, kiddo. Alex practically glowed with pride. Day 3 was the day before the dinner, and the energy in our house was electric. Alex was in full chef mode. He had timers going off every 15 minutes, 3 different pots simmering on the stove. and he was tasting everything, constantly adjusting seasonings like he'd been doing this his whole life. The beef bourguignon was in its final braising stage, filling our entire house with this incredible aroma that had our neighbors texting to ask what we were cooking. The pasta was perfectly dried and stored. The vegetables were prepped and waiting. But Alex wasn't done. Oh no! He'd decided that store-bought dessert wasn't good enough either. He was making apple tart tatin from scratch. Alex, honey, that's a really difficult dessert, I said, watching him carefully arrange paper-thin apple slices in perfect overlapping circles. I know, Mom, but Grandma loves apples. Remember how she used to make apple crisp when I was little? This is like that, but fancier. More sophisticated. He'd remembered that too. Another tiny detail from years ago that he'd held on to and was now honoring in his own way. The tart tatin process was nerve-wracking to watch. Alex had to make caramel from scratch, which is basically controlled burning of sugar. 1 degree too hot, and the whole thing becomes bitter and unusable. I stood there watching my teenage son monitor a candy thermometer like his life depended on it, stirring melted sugar until it reached that perfect amber color that means the difference between success and disaster. 240 degrees, he murmured to himself. Come on, just a little more. When the caramel hit the perfect temperature and he poured it over those perfectly arranged apples, I swear I've never been prouder of anyone in my entire life. But the most beautiful moment came later that evening when Alex was doing his final prep work. He was practicing his plating, arranging each component of each dish, like he was presenting to a panel of judges. Mom, does this look right? He asked, showing me a plate of the beef bourguignon with the fresh pasta and perfectly cut vegetables. It looked like something from a 5-star restaurant. Beautiful, elegant, professional. Alex, this is incredible. This is truly incredible. That's when he sat down at the kitchen table, looked at me with these tired but hopeful eyes, and said something that still gives me chills. I just want her to be proud of me, Mom. Just once. I want her to look at something I've created and feel proud that I'm her grandson. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw honesty of that admission, broke my heart wide open, because every teenager deserves to have adults in their life who are proud of them. Not for what they achieve or how they measure up to expectations, but for who they are and the love they put into the world. She will be, sweetheart, I told him, hoping I wasn't setting him up for another disappointment. How could she not be? This is amazing! You're amazing! Alex spent that final evening writing out little cards explaining each dish. Where the recipes came from, why he'd chosen them, what each component meant. He wanted to make sure everyone understood the thought and care that had gone into every single bite. As I watched him write those cards in his careful handwriting, I realized something. Win or lose this dinner had already changed Alex. He'd discovered something about himself that no one could take away. He'd learned that he was capable of creating something beautiful, something meaningful, something that expressed love in a language all his own. He was ready. The food was ready. Our house was ready. We had no idea that Margaret had other plans. The day of the dinner arrived like Christmas morning in our house. Alex had been up since dawn, not because he needed to be, but because he was too excited to sleep. I found him in the kitchen at 6 a.m., already dressed in the button-down shirt and slacks he'd picked out specially for the occasion, checking and rechecking his timeline one final time. Morning, chef, I said, trying to match his energy, even though I hadn't had my coffee yet. Morning, Mom. Everything's on schedule. The beef just needs to be reheated and plated. The pasta water is ready to boil and the tarte tatin is perfect. Look. He showed me the dessert, and I swear it looked like something from a magazine. Golden caramelized apples arranged in perfect spirals, the pastry crisp and beautiful. It was a work of art. The house itself looked amazing too. Alex had spent the previous evening setting up our dining room like a real restaurant. He'd borrowed folding tables from our neighbors to seat 20 people, found mismatched but elegant plates from thrift stores, and made them work together beautifully. even strung up some string lights between the windows to create ambiance. I want it to feel special, he'd explained while arranging flowers he'd picked from our own garden. Like a real celebration. By noon, Alex was in full preparation mode. He'd printed out little menu cards for each place setting, describing each course in elegant handwriting. He'd folded napkins into perfect triangles. He'd even created a playlist of soft jazz music that he thought would set the right mood. Aunt Sarah should be here around 4, he said, checking his phone for the 100th time that day. And Cousin Emma texted that she's bringing her boyfriend. That's 21 people now, but I made extra food just in case. The kid had thought of everything. Every single detail had been planned, prepared, and perfected. I was folding napkins and watching Alex taste the bourguignon one more time when my phone buzzed. It was a text message, and when I saw Margaret's name on the screen, my stomach dropped before I even read the words. Change of plans. We're celebrating at the Elite Park Hotel downtown instead. Much more appropriate for a milestone birthday. Adults only. Sorry for the late notice. I stared at that message for what felt like an eternity, reading it over and over, hoping somehow the words would change. 3 hours before the dinner. 3 hours before guests were supposed to arrive. After 3 days of non-stop preparation. Adults only. Those 2 words hit me like a physical blow. Not family only, or small celebration, or even change of venue. Adults only, as if Alex wasn't part of the family, as if his age somehow disqualified him from celebrating his own grandmother's birthday. Mom, what's wrong? I looked up to see Alex standing in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his apron over his good shirt, still holding the wooden spoon he'd been using to taste the sauce. His face was bright and hopeful and completely unprepared for what I was about to do to him. Alex, honey, I need to talk to you. Something in my voice must have warned him because his smile faltered immediately. He set down the spoon and walked over to where I was sitting at the kitchen table, moving slowly like he was approaching something dangerous. What's going on? Did someone cancel? Is Grandma okay? I held out my phone with the text message still open on the screen. Alex took it from me with trembling hands, and I watched his face as he read those devastating words. The change was instant and heartbreaking. His shoulders sagged. His mouth fell open slightly. The light in his eyes just went out like someone had flipped a switch. He read the message once, then again, then a third time, as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. I don't understand, he whispered, his voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear him. Adults only, but it's her birthday dinner. I made her birthday dinner. He looked around our transformed dining room at the carefully set tables, at the flowers at the menu cards he'd spent hours writing by hand. Everything he'd worked so hard to create suddenly looked different. Smaller somehow. Sadder. Maybe it's a mistake, he said, grasping for hope. Maybe she meant to send this to someone else. Or maybe she forgot that I'm 17 now, practically an adult. I wanted so badly to agree with him, to find some way to make this make sense that didn't involve accepting the cruel truth. But I couldn't lie to him. Not about this. Alex, sweetheart, I don't think it's a mistake. That's when he really crumbled. Not dramatically, not with shouting or tears, but in that quiet way that's somehow so much worse. He just seemed to fold in on himself like a flower closing up when the sun goes away. He sat down heavily in the chair next to me and stared at his hands. Did I do something wrong? Mom, did I mess up? Somehow, I know I'm not as smart as Cousin Michael or as talented as Emma, but I thought maybe if I just tried hard enough. His voice trailed off, and I could see him mentally going through every interaction he'd had with Margaret over the past few weeks, searching for some explanation, some reason why he'd been excluded from his own grandmother's birthday celebration. You didn't do anything wrong, I said firmly. Alex, listen to me. You did everything right. This dinner is incredible. You are incredible. This has nothing to do with you and everything to do with her. But I could see he didn't believe me. How could he? When you're 17 and your grandmother excludes you from a family celebration, the natural assumption is that you're the problem. I just wanted her to be proud of me, he said so quietly. I had to lean in to hear him. I thought if I could show her how much I'd learned, how hard I was willing to work, maybe she'd see me the way she sees the others. That broke my heart completely. Because Alex had learned and he had worked hard and he had created something beautiful and meaningful. But Margaret couldn't see it because she was too caught up in her own narrow definition of what mattered. Alex stood up slowly and walked back into the kitchen, looking around at all the food he'd prepared with such love and care. The beef bourguignon that had been simmering for hours, the fresh pasta hanging like golden silk, the perfect tarte tatin that had taken him 3 attempts to get right. "What do we do with all this food?" he asked, and there was something so defeated in his voice that I wanted to drive straight to Margaret's house and give her a piece of my mind. Instead, I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. "We're not letting this food go to waste," I said, standing up and walking over to him. "And we're not letting your hard work be for nothing. This dinner is happening, Alex, just not the way we originally planned." He looked at me with confusion and hope warring in his expression. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're going to find people who will appreciate what you've created. People who will understand the love and effort you put into this meal. People who deserve to taste food made with this much care." For the first time since he'd read that text message, Alex's face showed a flicker of interest. "Like who?" And that's when I had an idea that was either brilliant or completely crazy. Probably both. "How do you feel about turning this into a completely different kind of dinner party, Alex?" I said, taking his hands in mine. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you've created here isn't just food. It's love made tangible. It's 3 days of care and effort, and hope poured into every single dish. That doesn't become less valuable just because your grandmother can't see it." He was listening, but I could see the doubt still clouding his eyes. "You said you wanted to show her that you learned about taking care of things, about putting love into what you create. Well, you did that. You absolutely did that. Just because she's choosing not to receive that gift doesn't mean the gift isn't beautiful." Alex nodded slowly, but I could tell he wasn't quite there yet. He needed something more concrete, something that would transform his heartbreak into purpose. "Or, what if we took all this love you've put into this meal and shared it with people who would truly appreciate it? People who don't get to eat restaurant-quality food very often. People who deserve to feel celebrated and cared for." That's when the idea hit me like lightning. "The youth shelter," I said suddenly. "Alex, what if we took this feast to the Riverside Youth Shelter downtown? And what about Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Rodriguez from your old elementary school? They're both retired now, living on teacher pensions. When's the last time they had a meal like this?" I could see something shifting in Alex's expression. The defeat was still there, but underneath it, something else was beginning to kindle. "You mean, like a community dinner?" he asked quietly. "Exactly like a community dinner. But not just any community dinner. A dinner prepared by a chef who put 3 days of love into every single component. A dinner for people who will understand exactly how special this is." For the first time since reading Margaret's text, Alex straightened his shoulders. "You really think they'd want it?" "Alex, honey, I think they'd be honored. I think you're about to give a whole group of people one of the most meaningful meals of their lives." The transformation in Alex was gradual but unmistakable. The defeated slump in his posture began to lift. The dullness in his eyes started to brighten. He looked around the kitchen again, but this time, instead of seeing wasted effort, he was seeing possibility. "We'd need to transport everything carefully," he said, his mind already working through the logistics. "The bourguignon travels well, but the pasta would be better if we cooked it fresh on site, and we'd need serving equipment. One step at a time, I said, pulling out my phone. First, let me call the shelter and see if they can accommodate a surprise dinner for tonight. The conversation with the shelter director, Maria Santos, was one I'll never forget. When I explained the situation that my teenage son had prepared a gourmet meal for 20 people and wanted to share it with their residents, there was silence on the other end for a long moment. "Are you serious?" she finally asked. "Because we have about 18 kids here right now who are used to eating pizza and sandwiches. A home-cooked meal would be like Christmas morning." "We're completely serious," I said, watching Alex's face light up as he heard her response. "Ma'am, I don't know what your son did to deserve having his original dinner canceled, but our kids are about to be the luckiest teenagers in the city." While I was on the phone with Maria, Alex was already moving, his energy completely restored. He was pulling containers out of cabinets, figuring out how to pack everything safely for transport. "Mom, we're going to need help," he said as I hung up. "This is too much food for just the two of us to handle." That's when I called Uncle Mike. "Mike, we need a favor. Actually, we need a miracle." When I explained what had happened and what we were trying to do, Mike didn't hesitate for even a second. "Give me 30 minutes. I'm calling everyone I know." And he did. Mike started with his veteran buddies, guys who understood the value of a home-cooked meal and the importance of supporting young people. Within an hour, our house was full of volunteers. There was Jake Martinez, who brought his truck for transportation. Sarah Chen, a nurse who volunteered at the shelter regularly and knew exactly what would work best for the kids. Tom Williams, who owned a catering business and showed up with professional-grade food warming equipment. And a dozen others, friends and neighbors, who heard about what Alex was trying to do and wanted to be part of it. "All right, Chef Alex," Mike announced when everyone had arrived. "You're in charge. Tell us what you need." I watched my son, who 2 hours earlier had been crushed by his grandmother's rejection, step up and take command of a room full of adults who were there specifically to support his vision. "Okay," Alex said, his voice gaining confidence with each word. "The beef bourguignon needs to stay hot during transport. The pasta will cook fresh at the shelter, the vegetables can be reheated, and the tarte tatin should travel just fine if we're careful." What followed was the most beautiful chaos I've ever witnessed. Our kitchen became mission control for a community-wide effort to transform Alex's heartbreak into something magnificent. Sarah and 2 other volunteers carefully packed the bourguignon into thermal containers. Jake and Tom figured out how to safely transport Alex's handmade pasta without breaking a single strand. Mike organized a caravan of vehicles to move everything to the shelter. But the most amazing part was watching Alex in his element. This wasn't just about salvaging a meal anymore. He was creating something entirely new, something better than what he'd originally planned. "Mrs. Chen," he said to Sarah, "do you think the kids would like it if we set up the dining like a real restaurant with proper place settings and everything?" "Alex, honey, some of these kids have never eaten at a real restaurant. They're going to think they're in a 5-star establishment." The shelter had a large common room that could accommodate everyone, but it was pretty basic. Folding tables, plastic chairs, fluorescent lighting. Not exactly the ambiance Alex had been envisioning. "This won't do," he said, looking around the space. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right." That's when the community really showed up. Tom brought tablecloths from his catering supplies. Sarah's daughter showed up with battery-powered string lights that she'd been planning to use for a school dance. Mike somehow procured actual cloth napkins and real silverware. Within 2 hours, that institutional common room had been transformed into something magical. Soft lighting, properly set tables, fresh flowers that our neighbors had contributed from their own gardens. It looked like a restaurant you'd make reservations at. Alex was everywhere, at once directing the setup, tasting everything one more time, making sure every detail was perfect. But this time, he wasn't working alone. He had a whole team of people who believed in what he was doing. "Alex," Tom said, as they were setting up the serving station, "I've been in the food service business for 15 years. What you've created here isn't just a meal. It's an experience. These kids are about to feel valued and cared for in a way that food can communicate better than words. I watched my son take in that compliment, really absorb it. For 3 days, he'd been cooking for someone who didn't appreciate his efforts. Now he was surrounded by adults who recognized his talent and his heart. The youth shelter residents started filtering into the dining room around 6 p.m., and their reactions were everything I could have hoped for. These were kids aged 14 to 18, many of whom had been living in the system for years. They weren't used to surprises, especially not good ones. "Is this really for us?" asked a girl named Maya, staring at the elegant table settings in disbelief. "This is absolutely for you," Alex said, beaming. "I hope you're hungry because we have 3 courses planned." What happened next was pure magic. Alex, with help from his volunteer team, served that meal like he was running his own restaurant. Each plate was carefully composed. Each dish was explained with the same care he'd put into writing those original menu cards. The kids' reactions were everything. 17-year-old Marcus, who'd been in foster care since he was 12, took one bite of the beef bourguignon and just closed his eyes. "Man, this tastes like someone's grandmother made it," he said. "Like someone's grandmother who really loved them." 15-year-old Jasmine asked for seconds on the pasta, then thirds, then finally just looked at Alex and said, "Can you teach me how to make this? I want to be able to cook like this someday." That's when I saw something beautiful happen. Alex, who had spent 3 days cooking in solitude, preparing to impress people who didn't value his efforts, was suddenly surrounded by young people who were genuinely curious about his techniques, his ingredients, his creative process. "The secret to the pasta," he explained to a group gathered around him, "is making the dough just wet enough to hold together, but not so wet that it gets sticky. And you have to knead it for at least 10 minutes to develop the gluten structure." These kids were hanging on his every word. They asked questions about cooking times, about where he'd learned his techniques, about whether he wanted to be a professional chef. For the first time in his life, Alex was being treated like the expert he'd become. But the most beautiful moment came when they brought out the tarte tatin. The room got quiet as Alex explained how he'd made the caramel from scratch, how he'd arranged each apple slice by hand, how the whole thing had to be flipped at exactly the right moment to create that perfect presentation. When he cut into the tart and served the first slice, the golden caramel caught the string lights just right, and the whole room seemed to sparkle. "I've never had anything this fancy," whispered a boy named David who couldn't have been more than 16. "This is like something from a cooking show." Actually, Alex said, his confidence fully restored, "This is better than a cooking show. This is real, and it's made with love, and it's for all of you." As the evening wound down and the kids reluctantly headed back to their rooms, Alex was glowing in a way I'd never seen before. This wasn't the desperate hope for approval that had driven him all week. This was genuine satisfaction, the knowledge that he'd created something meaningful and shared it with people who truly appreciated it. "Mom," he said, as we were packing up the empty serving dishes, "I think this turned out better than the original dinner would have been." And you know what? He was absolutely right. But the story wasn't over yet. Word had somehow spread throughout the community about what Alex was doing, and by 7 p.m. we had unexpected guests arriving at the shelter. Mrs. Patterson, Alex's second-grade teacher, showed up with tears in her eyes. She'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine about the dinner and couldn't stay away. "Alex, honey," she said, giving him a hug that lasted a full minute. "I always knew you were special. But this is extraordinary." Behind her came Mr. Rodriguez, who taught Alex 4th grade math and always remembered to ask about his cooking experiments during parent-teacher conferences. Then came Mrs. Kim from down the street, a single mother who worked 2 jobs and barely had time to cook anything more elaborate than frozen dinners for her own kids. "I hope you don't mind the extra guests," Mrs. Patterson said to Alex. "But when I heard what you were doing, I had to come see it for myself. And I had to bring some friends who would appreciate this as much as I do." By the time everyone was seated, we had close to 30 people in that transformed common room. The shelter kids, the volunteer team, the unexpected community members, all sharing space and anticipation. Alex stood at the front of the room, looking out at all these faces, people from every corner of his world who had come together because of something he'd created. He'd planned to say a few words before the meal began, but I could see him struggling with the magnitude of the moment. He started, his voice a little shaky. I guess I should explain how we all ended up here tonight. The room went quiet, everyone giving him their full attention. This dinner was originally supposed to be for my grandmother's 75th birthday. I spent 3 days preparing it because I wanted to show her how much she meant to me, how much I'd learned from the time we spent together when I was little. He paused, took a breath, and continued. But things changed and she couldn't be here tonight. And you know what, I think that's okay. Because looking around this room, seeing all of you here, I realized something important. Food isn't just about feeding people. It's about bringing people together. It's about showing care and creating connections. Mrs. Patterson was already wiping her eyes. This meal was made with love, Alex continued, his confidence growing with each word. It was meant for my grandma, but now it's for all of you. And I think maybe it found its way to exactly the people who needed it most. The applause that followed wasn't polite dinner party clapping. It was genuine, heartfelt appreciation from a room full of people who understood that they were witnessing something special. What happened during that meal was pure magic. I watched Marcus, the 17-year-old from foster care, help Mrs. Kim cut her meat when she mentioned her arthritis was acting up. I saw Jasmine from the shelter asking Mrs. Patterson about her teaching career while they shared the soup course. Mr. Rodriguez took 1 spoonful of Alex's homemade butternut squash soup and immediately started crying. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come when something touches your soul unexpectedly. 40 years of teaching, he said to Alex, his voice thick with emotion. And I've never had a student do something like this. This soup tastes like comfort, like home, like someone cared enough to make it perfect. But the moment that really got me was when Alex brought out a surprise 4th course that he'd apparently been working on in secret. Individual chocolate soufflés perfectly risen warm from the oven. The shelter kids had never seen anything like it. David, the quiet 16-year-old, took 1 bite and his whole face lit up. "How did you make it so fluffy?" he asked Alex. "It's like eating a chocolate cloud." "The secret is folding the egg whites in just right," Alex explained, launching into a detailed explanation of the technique. "Too aggressive, and you deflate the mixture. Too gentle, and it doesn't incorporate properly." He was teaching, sharing his knowledge, passing on skills to kids who were hanging on his every word. This was Alex, at his absolute best, confident and generous, and completely in his element. That's when something unexpected happened. A woman with a camera and a microphone appeared in the doorway, talking quietly with Maria, the shelter director. "Alex," Maria called out, "there's someone here from Channel 7 News. Apparently word got out about what you're doing here tonight. Would you be willing to talk to them?" The reporter, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, explained that Tom, the caterer who'd helped with the setup, had called the station about the story. She'd come expecting a simple human interest piece about a community dinner. But what she found was something much more compelling. "Alex, can you tell me how a 17-year-old ends up cooking a gourmet meal for 30 people at a youth shelter on a Saturday night?" She asked her camera operator, filming the transformed dining room behind them. Alex looked around the room at all the faces of people who'd become part of his story and smiled. "Sometimes plans change," he said, simply, "but sometimes they change for the better. I learned tonight that the people you're cooking for matter more than the reason you started cooking in the first place." The interview was brief, but Jennifer made sure to capture the essence of what was happening. She filmed Alex explaining his techniques to interested kids, showed Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Rodriguez talking about the impact teachers can have on students, and ended with a wide shot of the entire room. All these different people brought together by one teenager's determination to share something beautiful. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Alex was surrounded by well-wishers and new friends. Kids from the shelter asked if he'd come back and teach them more cooking techniques. Mrs. Patterson invited him to speak to the current students at his old elementary school about following your passions. Mr. Rodriguez offered to help him research culinary scholarships, but the most meaningful conversation happened with Uncle Mike, who'd stayed to help with cleanup. "You know, Alex," Mike said as they were stacking chairs. "Your great-grandfather, my dad, would have been incredibly proud of what you did tonight." "I never really knew him," Alex said. "He was a lot like you, actually. Quiet, thoughtful, but with this way of bringing people together. During the Depression, he used to organize community meals in our neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just whatever people could contribute. But he made everyone feel welcome and valued." Mike pulled out his phone and showed Alex an old black and white photo of a man standing behind a table full of food surrounded by neighbors. "He always said that feeding people was the most honest way to show love. No pretense, no conditions, just nourishment and care." Mike handed Alex a folded piece of paper. "These are some of his recipes. Simple stuff, but made with the same spirit you brought to tonight. I think you should have them." Alex unfolded the paper carefully, looking at the handwritten recipes in faded ink. His eyes lit up as he read through them. "Uncle Mike, this is incredible. Thank you. Just promise me you'll keep doing what you're doing. Don't let anyone convince you that this kind of generosity is naive or impractical. The world needs more people like you." Oh, we were packing up the last of the serving dishes when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Margaret. "Saw the news story online. Very impressive. Perhaps we could talk soon." I stared at that message for a long moment, feeling a familiar anger rising in my chest. Very impressive. As if Alex's kindness and talent were a performance that had finally met her standards. I showed the text to Alex, watching his face carefully for his reaction. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. I think," I said, choosing my words carefully, "that some people only appreciate things after other people tell them it's valuable. And I think you deserve better than that." I typed back a simple response. "We'll talk when you're ready to appreciate Alex's heart, not just his accomplishments." It felt good to set that boundary. To protect my son from having to earn love he should have had freely all along. But Alex surprised me. "Mom, it's okay. I don't need her approval anymore. Tonight showed me something important." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I found my people. The kids here, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Rodriguez, Uncle Mike, all the volunteers who showed up tonight. These are the people who see me for who I really am and value what I have to offer." He was right. Over the course of one evening, Alex had built a community of people who appreciated his talents and his heart. Not because a news camera was there to document it, not because it reflected well on them, but because they recognized genuine goodness when they saw it. 3 weeks later, Alex approached me with a new idea. He wanted to organize monthly community dinners at the shelter, teaching cooking classes for the kids and providing restaurant-quality meals for people who rarely experience that kind of care. I've been thinking about what Uncle Mike said about great-grandpa bringing people together during the Depression. I want to do something like that, but make it my own. He'd already talked to Maria at the shelter, who was thrilled with the idea. He'd reached out to local grocery stores about donating ingredients. He'd even contacted the culinary school downtown about having their students volunteer as teaching assistants. "The best part," Alex told me excitedly, "is that Mrs. Patterson wants to help coordinate it and Mr. Rodriguez said he'd handle the logistics. And some of the kids from that first dinner want to be regular helpers." That's when I knew that Margaret's rejection, as painful as it had been in the moment, had actually freed Alex to find his true calling. Instead of cooking to earn approval from someone who couldn't see his worth, he was now cooking to serve a community that celebrated him exactly as he was. 6 months later, Alex's monthly dinners had grown into a recognized community program. He'd been featured in the local newspaper twice, had been invited to speak at the high school about youth leadership, and had even received a scholarship offer from the Culinary Institute. But more importantly, he'd found his purpose. Every month, that shelter dining room filled with people who came not just for the food, but for the sense of belonging that Alex created around every meal. Margaret did eventually reach out, asking if she could attend one of the dinners. Alex, with his characteristic generosity, said yes. She came, she ate, she watched her grandson in his element, surrounded by people who loved and appreciated him. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "I made a mistake," she said simply. "I almost missed out on knowing this incredible young man because I was too focused on the wrong things." It was an apology, and I accepted it. But I also made sure she understood that Alex's worth wasn't dependent on her recognition, and never had been. Today, Alex is planning to study culinary arts in college with the goal of opening a restaurant that employs youth aging out of foster care. He still cooks with the same love and attention to detail that he brought to that first birthday dinner. But now he does it for people who understand that food prepared with care is one of the most honest expressions of love there is. And me, I learned that sometimes the most devastating rejections can become the most beautiful redirections. Margaret's exclusion led Alex to find his true community, his real purpose, and his authentic self. The dinner that was supposed to prove Alex's worth to one person ended up proving his worth to an entire community. And in the end, that made all the difference. Alex's story proves that sometimes rejection leads us exactly where we're meant to be. Have you ever had a moment where something that felt like a devastating blow turned into your greatest blessing? Share your story in the comments below. And if this touched your heart like it did mine, hit that subscribe button for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. Thanks for listening.